absolutely normal, and it can teach us some of the biggest learnings of our life.
If we are able to acknowledge without resistance, allow it, and stay with it, however intense the feelings are, over a period of time, they will settle. Just by staying with it, you realize that you are not your emotions. There is a gap.
If you are kind to yourself and if you meditate, you can melt those ice blocks and you will feel very light.
They all can be, they can heal when we bring forth that light of awareness and mindfulness to it. What we need to do is, there's a very nice Zen saying that you leave your front and back door open, allow thoughts to come in and go, don't serve them tea. Just be present, allow things as they are, and don't suppress it. No, it is vital for our well being, for our survival, and for our resilience. The most important thing is that we take that first step.
Life flows like an endless ocean of stories. We often miss these precious tales as we rush through our days, too consumed by daily struggles to notice the poetry swirling around us. Yet within these stories lie the keys to our past, sparks for our creativity, and fresh winds to fill our sails. I am Abhra, a writer based in Melbourne, in quest of those stories with diverse voices that tell them from every corner of the world. Welcome to Stories and Stanza.
Hi Saroj, welcome to Stories and Stanza. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great, Abhra, and thank you so much. And it's a real privilege and pleasure to be a part of your podcast. I really enjoy watching all your podcasts, especially the Fail With Me series, because I think it is such a beautiful and unique concept. And I'm so glad that you have called me today.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And before we get started, could you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yes, of course. My name is Dr. Saroj Dube. I'm by profession, I'm a gastroenterologist based in India, Delhi, NCR. And I'm an author of a book which I've written for the first time. It's a self help motivational book, RX for Resilience, that was published by Hay House India, and it got released in February. I'm also what I can call a motivational speaker. I've given a TEDx talk on the art of doing and being that came out. It's available in the TEDx site. So, this is briefly about me.
Thank you so much. And I listened to the TEDx talk, and I was thinking that it aligns with some of the ideas I am trying to get across through my podcast to the listeners. And
Oh,
really amazing and heartfelt. I created Stories and Stanza predominantly to talk to creators, writers, editors. Then gradually I started on the Fail With Me series. And the idea was that I had a few difficult years. And when I was going through that, I started looking up for motivational books and speeches. And for some reason, I couldn't connect with that narrative. So I thought that when I came out of my bad phase and I wanted to talk about it, just wanted to say that failure is okay, failure is absolutely normal, and it can teach us some of the biggest learnings of our life. That is how the premise of
absolutely.
failure was created.
Actually, what really struck me when I came across your podcast is, one is that it is such an amazing concept, and it is so unique and so powerful, because I think across the centuries and across the whole world, we can always see that it is some kind of failure, or some maybe some tragedy, or something which actually often leads to real growth and a different kind of a journey. This is very often not talked about. We always, even for people who have gone through those kind of failures, we always talk about the success and what they have achieved, but people are generally quite averse, or I think maybe a bit reticent about talking about failure. And as we'll be also discussing how any kind of failure, of course, is a broad term. It can be whatever, it can be a disappointment, it can be a setback, it can be a challenge, but sometimes it can lead to something very beautiful and metamorphosis. And I think you're among the few people who really are discussing about it, and people are willing to open up and come out with their stories.
Yes, thank you. And I feel that we grow up with so many biases, so much conditioning that you have to do this is a race, you have to win, you have to achieve this and this.
Yes.
And we develop this concept of ideal world in our mind, which is full with materialistic success. When it comes to reality, we succeed and fail both at the same time. We fail at something, we succeed at something, and life moves on. And we do not build that knowledge or experience about handling failure with a open heart, open mind. And
Yes.
that is where this whole concepts of fail with me came in. I had a very life changing experience when everything started moving towards betterment, and I've seen an impact in my mental health, in my physical health. I feel that those stories need to come out. I've got such heartwarming support from my listeners who have joined and and of course my guests, and who have joined and lent their voice into this platform, making it so rich and powerful. So the first thing I
Absolutely.
want to hear from you is that you have a wonderful personal story to share when it comes to failure and learning from there. Would you like to share that with us, with the listeners in Stories and Stanza?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, in my book also, the first chapter is about being broken open. And that is the beginning of a transformative journey took place. Although this was there for some time, this journey. As I said, I'm a gastroenterologist, I'm a doctor. And the process, just a few years before this particular incident, I was looking into the deeper side of life, they're trying to find out meaning to life, what is the kind of reality behind this superficial facade. But my work actually was always taking me back, and I would say, okay, there is time later to delve into all these aspects. Let us first look after my profession and whatever I have to achieve, and the family and all that. So here what happened is, we as a gastroenterologist, we do a procedure which is called ERCP, which is an endoscopic removal of the bile duct stones, which is attached to the gallbladder. So there was a young lady who I had done this procedure, and the procedure seemingly went along usual lines. But subsequently, after a few hours, we found that she was in excruciating pain, and it was discovered that she had developed a major complication, which sometimes takes place. And that was detected in time. And the corrective part was a surgery, which was again done within time. But somehow, due to reasons unknown, the lady did not, she kept on deteriorating. She progressively worsened, then had to be shifted in the ICU, was on a ventilator. And despite all our efforts, we could not save her. And she ultimately, she passed away. Now, somehow, this whole incident left a very deep impact in me. And it was as if I had been totally shattered and broken open. As doctors, I would like to mention to my viewers that these are things, these are challenges which we often face, and it's not the first time and neither the last time. Whatever, even to the best of our abilities, when we do things, sometimes things go wrong, and we have to just bounce back and, just we have, because otherwise, if after every setback, if we stop, we get totally broken open, then it's not possible for us to resume our work. But somehow I don't know what it was. Probably I, as in the book also, I was thinking about it. Maybe it was because I was already in the process of asking questions, finding out my meditation, mindfulness journey. I would say the ground was fertile for something to just crack and break open. And this incident was the catalyst in many ways. And this set me into a deep soul searching. I wanted to know at any cost what reality is, what is happiness, what is permanent, what is temporary, how things just in a matter of a couple of days or something, your whole life seemingly falls apart. So, what is the truth behind everything? And this led me to a journey where my own meditation and mindfulness was part of it. Then I was already into the habit of reading. I read a lot. I met a lot of teachers. And I would say this entire journey took place over, I would say, 7 to 8 years. And ultimately, when I developed a sort of a clarity and understanding, then I was willing to write more about it because I felt that something needed to be shared to people. And shall I talk about that now or a bit later?
Yeah, sure. Please enlighten us.
Abra, when this particular incident took place, what was happening is that there was a lot of emotions going on, as you can understand. Emotions of fear, of sadness, of guilt, whether I did something wrong, and fear of humiliation, because obviously there are medical legal ramifications, things to be thought about. The patient's relatives were absolutely angry and demanding explanations, as it is their right. And it was my own feelings were there. Then there was the social media also involved. The management were asking things. So all in all, it was a very challenging and tumultuous time. What I realized at that time is that I could not. Usually, I'll tell you what we normally do is when we face a lot of unpleasant and challenging and dark emotions, we try to suppress it. We try to suppress it. The last thing we want to do is to face it or confront it. We suppress it, avoid it, distract ourselves from it, or try to do something else than face it. Intuitively, based on what I had, my understanding was, I knew that the only way out was through. I had to confront and embrace all these emotions, and only after facing it could anything come out of it. And I would sit daily for this was for 3 weeks and much after that also, and all these emotions would be there. It was, I would say, the most difficult thing to stay open. And my only this thing process was to stay open and not to resist all these emotions and feelings, whatever it was there. So that was what I was doing. And initially, even sitting for 5 minutes was difficult, but gradually I gathered the courage, and over a period of time, I could stay with them. And at one time, I realized when I was sitting with all the emotions, I was surrounded by a presence, a very still presence, which was embracing all these feelings. So, what was there is that there were all these emotions of sadness, fear, terror, humiliation, and at the same time, something surrounding it was very vast, still, and feeling very light. I would say at one time it was even joyful. And at that time, I was extremely puzzled. You can understand because I was wondering that how is it that I'm feeling so much of these emotions and unpleasant emotions, and at the same time, there was this stillness and peace also. It was later on I realized that this was what we can call as the presence, the stillness of presence. And I realized, I experienced that this is part of what we are. In many ways, we can say this is actually our true nature, which is for all of us. But because we are so much involved in our thoughts and worries that we never really gain access to it. And here's something had happened which kind of it had broken all the boundaries of the thoughts, and being able to stay with all these feelings allowed an access to that deeper dimension. And that was actually very comforting. And that was the start of, I would say, this whole journey where I realized what is fearless within me. So when I, in the process of embracing my deepest fears and my deepest vulnerability, I experience face to face what that fearlessness, what that stillness is. And that gave me the courage to sit for even longer periods. That presence was so comforting. And over a period of time, like things finally became things go back to the normal. But that stillness and that presence has, I would say, over a period of so many years, stayed with me and deepened. And that also, the whole process of transformation which took place, it also gave me an access later on to a lot of joy and wonder among the smallest thing. I became very open to life on as a whole. And that is what the whole transformation is about.
That is so amazing and heartwarming. I wanted to hear from you about negative emotions, and you were telling me about your journey. So, how do we process negative emotions? Could you tell me about that?
Yes. Abhra, the very, as a doctor, we were never taught about emotions in our medical school. In fact, after my book was released, I was invited to give a talk to the cardiac surgeons, and I talked about emotions. What I said is that this is something which we have never really been taught to face. Things like thoughts and emotions and how to face them, we have never been taught as doctors. But this is something which I think is so important, not just for doctors, but for everyone. But as doctors, because we are dealing with illness, with catastrophe, with life and death on a daily basis, this is something which needs to be addressed. And at the end of my talk, all the doctors were very glad that I had given this, because they said that you have really brought out a very important subject. So, what I realized is that we, as I said in the beginning, we never really confront our emotions. We are never taught to stay with it. It was actually the process of mindfulness where I learned and I trained myself to stay with the feelings. And what happens is, there's a very, in the book also I mentioned, there's a very nice book, I think it's called A Stroke of Insight by Jill Bolt Taylor. She's a neuroscientist and she had a stroke. And what she described is that our emotions have lifespan of 90 seconds actually. We think that some of the emotions, if we are very angry, if we are very hurt, they go on for hours or days or sometimes even months. But actually, the emotions per se have a lifespan, which she was able to be based on her knowledge as a neuroscientist. She could say it was, say, around 90 seconds. It may be a little more or less, whatever. But the fact is, then why do we experience prolonged emotions? That is because we keep on replaying that in our mind. That 90 seconds is the time for the chemicals to flush out from the system. There is that the bodily sensation, the physical sensation, the hormonal things, all this takes place in that 90 seconds and then it flushes out. But we keep on replaying it. For example, if something happens, we may say, why did this happen? Oh, it always happens to me. No, it should not. And we resist it. So, resistance plays a very important part in prolonging what we are feeling. And if we are just present with our emotions, when we are just able to open up to it, be present, and feel it, every emotion has a bodily sensation. I think you have also done some work on somatic experiencing.
Yes.
So you can understand that all our emotions, it's not just taking place in our minds. It's not emotion that you're feeling sad or something. No, there is a bodily sensation. And we usually don't experience it because we don't really try to stay with it. But when we stay, we can see that there'll be a feeling. It can be either in the chest, a kind of compression in the chest or in the tummy, uncomfortable feeling, a feeling of constriction. What we need to do, and what I realized through this whole process, is we just have to stay open to it. Be localize it. First of all, is to acknowledge it. We rarely acknowledge it. We first acknowledge, okay, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling unhappy. Where is it in the body? Staying with it. And once we stay with it, this process of that 90 seconds takes place. And it can, it's not as if by the count of a clock it will be 90 seconds, it can be whatever. But the fact remains that if we are able to acknowledge without resistance, allow it, and stay with it, however intense the feelings are, over a period of time, they will settle. And this is something which it was only through my experience of sitting with the emotions could I realize. For people, especially who are interested in mindfulness, there's one very simple acronym, RAIN, which I can describe. It may be very useful for people. So it's what I have just described. So here, RAIN, R is recognize, A is accept, I is investigate, and N is non identification. So, what happens is I can invite all my listeners to just think of something in their mind, maybe not a very intense emotion, some maybe restlessness or agitation. So, first is recognize. Rather than the emotion coming and then we recognize, you can just be aware, okay, here some anger, agitation is coming. You recognize it, acknowledge it. A is allow or accept. Don't resist it. That why is it happening? It should not take place. No, not all these things. You just allow it to be there. Investigate is a kind of a physical investigation, which we talked about. Is it in the chest, in the neck, in the tummy? And N is non identification. Just by staying with it, you realize that you are not your emotions. There is a gap. You can see, for example, when you stay, you sit with it, you can investigate and find where it is. So that means that the emotion is at a little distance from you. And that actually makes a lot of difference. So often we are so overwhelmed with the emotion that we think that me and the emotion are the same. I am angry, I am upset. But when we stay with it, that gap opens up and gradually that increases, and that is very comforting.
That is so beautiful. I wanted to mention something that came out of somatic learning. This concept said that we are angry or sad or frustrated, any negative emotion, it can often be triggered by something that happened in the past, something that we are holding on to, and we are not just letting it go. Our instructor said that think about these as some kind of ice blocks. If you are kind to yourself and if you meditate, you can melt those ice blocks and you will feel very light. It changed my belief. So I wanted to understand what modern neuroscience says about this. What I
Yes.
found out is that when we have something traumatic, it can be a repressed memory, it usually stays as a known pattern, as a neural pathway. Because our brain is neuroplastic, it can heal and it can create new neural pathway, doesn't matter how old we are. And that is the true medical significance of mental healing. I wanted to hear from you, what do you think?
Absolutely. This is really very insightful and enlightening. And I totally agree to it. And there's, I think, is Gabor Mate. He has done a lot of exceptional work on the traumatic responses in childhood, how they lead to various patterns in adulthood, right from traumatic, painful experience to addiction later on. And you're very right, Abra, that all our experiences, right from our childhood, because in the childhood we are just trying to process things and we don't have a overall understanding. So it can be anything, say about maybe something about our parents or something about a friend saying something, the body. And there's a very nice book also somewhere, and a saying also, the body keeps the score. So the body actually stores all these things in our memory. And very often emotions are suppressed and repressed because at that time it does not seem same safe to allow it to be open, because maybe whatever has happened in our childhood, we feel the environment is not safe. So what happens is subconsciously, unconsciously, we are suppressing these emotions and burying it, but they are always there underneath the surface. And later on, and as you said, these neural pathways they develop, and maybe somewhere in the adulthood, whenever something happens to trigger these pathways, to trigger these memories, they just they explode and emotions just come out. Very often we have seen in our day-to-day lives, sometimes suddenly some people, it can be our partners, it can be our friends or our accomplices, where we see for some very innocuous or seemingly innocent statement might made by someone, and they will suddenly be they'll explode in rage or anger or sadness. This is probably because some emotion pathway has been triggered, which has been buried. And that is why it is so important in the healing process. And as you say, these neural pathways can be developed, can be because there is neuroplasticity and it can always be changed. So the first process, the first part is that we need to sit with these and kind of validate and process these emotions. They have been buried too long, and that is why they are triggering. So it there are a lot of studies where it has been shown that when these emotions, and sometimes it may require a very a trainer. Maybe we can't sit alone with it, especially if it is very traumatic, some childhood trauma or abuse. But with the help of a guide, of a teacher, a trained teacher, you can just sit and allow these emotions to process. And that, and so many patients have had a lot of healing. So this is of course more the work of psychologists, psychotherapists and trainers than in our gastroenterology process practice. But I, because I can see from both medical as well as from this spiritual point of view, I can understand how these childhood traumas can manifest later on. And another thing also, when you read, you can see again, Gabor Mate here, he has done so many this thing experiments, and a lot of, he's written a lot, and he's also very much uh, trained in de-addiction. And what he says is a lot of our addictions also, and addiction can be many things, it's not just alcohol or drugs or smoking, it can be even working is there's a term called work addiction, people are workaholics, so that can also be an addiction. And very often all these addictions, what they are actually doing is they are a cover, because we do not want to face that uncomfortable feeling. It can be anything, uncomfortable, painful feeling, or sadness. And sometimes, most of the time, people don't know about it. So, what happens is whenever the people are alone or just by themselves, there is these feelings surface, and to hide and suppress these feelings, people often take to addictions of various kinds. Again, here also the healing takes place is when you are willing to, in a compassionate manner, when we are willing to face all these emotions, these uncomfortable feelings, that itself can be a very important part of healing through addictions.
Yeah, absolutely. I have done some episodes on physical wellness as well. It's my favorite subject related to emotional intelligence. Is that, for example, how we have sugar cravings. If you walk into a supermarket, most of the things that you see, or they are bright or they are marketed that way, has certain amount of sugar in it. The things
Mm-hmm.
that are really healthy, they don't have any kind of marketing around it. So it's like whenever we are stressed or something, then we latch onto some addiction, whether it is food, can be alcohol, can be smoking, and it is some kind of defense mechanism that we are conditioned to accept, and then we never fully come out of it. We are never completely aware that we are creating a habit that we don't need. So we
Very
are
true.
compensating something. We are stressed and we are
Exactly.
compensating that with comfort food or drinks or any form of addiction. Then this
Exactly.
awareness, when you are fully emotionally intelligent, you are aware of what is going on in your mind, then you don't need anything to balance these things out.
Yes, I agree totally. And that is what emotional awareness and emotional intelligence is. I think the most important step, as you can also, you have been studying it for so many months, and you can understand the most important step, and which is done the least by us, is being aware. Being aware, the very fact, if we are aware of what is triggering us, if we are aware of the feelings that are coming forth, if we are mindful, and if we are able to acknowledge what is happening. For example, in the RAIN method, there was R is for recognize and acknowledge. So, very often, suppose something is troubling us, some agitation, some restlessness, we vent it out or act it out without actually acknowledging it. It is just that something is uncomfortable and it has to give way. But once we are willing to face it, to acknowledge it, and recognize it, that is, I would say, the most important part of our healing process. And whatever kind of, it may be the most painful emotions, most painful, maybe even buried emotions, childhood emotions, they all can be, they can heal when we bring forth that light of awareness and mindfulness to it. And even, I would say, a lot, even our emotions and our feelings have a lot to play in the physical manifestation of disease also. And I don't know if it is a scientific article or not, I can't remember, but there was a good study which had shown a correlation between suppressed emotions and even diseases like cancer and other diseases. Because what happens is, anything which is buried for a long time, it is going to manifest in the body in some way or the other. As a gastroenterologist, what we often face is people come with irritable bowel syndrome, symptoms of unexplained abdominal pain, vomiting, or dyspepsia, gastritis, and all the tests, we do all the tests, the ultrasound, CT scan, endoscopy, colonoscopy, and most of the time it is normal. Finally, we sometimes we have to just start anti-anxiety or antidepressant medicine. But what happens, although it's not just one factor which is in the play of IBS, but our anxieties, stress play a very important part. And I often tell my patients that if they can do some kind of mindfulness, some kind of work on their emotions and their feelings, it can help them a lot.
I was listening to your TED talk, you mentioned mindfulness and being present so
Mhm.
beautifully. And I have a personal question that I wanted to ask you. I grew up in a missionary school in India. One of the things we were told to is that just sit quiet and meditate. But we were never told how to meditate. And it took me a very long time to understand what breathing practices can do, what yoga can do, and telling the mind that you're safe and grounding yourself. I wanted to hear your thoughts about meditation and mindfulness, and how would you
Mm.
suggest someone practices that?
Very nice. Thank you so much for this question, because this is something which I'm very passionate about, and I've written a few chapters in the book also, and I've talked about it in my TEDx talk, because I have found it so useful myself. I remember when I started meditating, as you know, I'm a doctor and it's quite busy here in India. So I can vividly recall I normally sleep by around 11 o'clock, and I used to wake up around 6:30, 6:45 or so. That was maybe 10, 12 years ago. Then I thought, okay, I wanted to start this meditation practice. So I said, okay, let me see. The only way out was just waking up 15 minutes earlier or something. And so I started waking up 15 minutes earlier and doing it. What I realized was that those 15 minutes, it made such a lot of difference throughout my day in the way I could deal with people, whether at work or at home. So I was greedy for more. The only way was to cut down on my sleeping. So I started another 15 minutes, then it was half an hour. Now I wake up at 5 o'clock. So I try to do it for sometimes maybe 1.5 hours in the morning. But the amazing part is that even cutting down the sleep, and still I get around 6.5 hours or so, it actually increased my energy levels, it increased my productivity a lot. And that is what, and you have to feel it for yourself. You have to, no one can say that, okay, if you meditate, it's going to help your energy. You have to see it for yourself. And once you start getting the taste of it, and you can see that how those 15 minutes can lead to even 1 extra hour of energetic work, you yourself will be able to take out the time. And now the question about how we have to do. As in India, India is the home of all kinds of meditation and all, and meditation and yoga both. But one thing I'd like to say is, because the way it has been mentioned in the scriptures and it has been handed down through ages, sometimes it becomes a little difficult to understand. Because then I remember when I started initially, there was a lot of this thing about what posture I have to sit, and this particular posture. And I remember after a few weeks, I got fed up with that, because I thought I'll never be able to get this proper lotus posture. So, what kind of meditation I'll be able to do? And then I realized that was the help of both books in the East and West. So, there is a middle way, there is a balanced way, where the most important thing is what is happening when you sit. The posture can, of course, it helps. But what I do normally is to just sit in a comfortable position. It may be in a cross leg, but people can do it sitting on a chair. And I invite people to do it whether they are traveling, if they're sitting behind the car, or in a metro or bus or whatever. So the most important thing is the process of sitting actually. And here we just take any kind of a focus, some anchor, which can be our most commonly it's breathing, it can be a mantra, and then we just use that anchor lightly to basically it is bringing us to the present. So here I can do a very small few seconds thing. So wherever people are, they can just sit comfortably, just be relaxed. The main thing is to be present and centered. If you're sitting, you can just feel your body against the chair, feet against the ground, and just lightly bring your awareness to your breathing. It can be the chest or the nose or through your tummy. Just breathing in and out. The problem most often happens is about our thoughts. And this is where a lot of confusion lies. People believe that when they are sitting for meditation, they have to suppress all their thoughts and they have to be thought free. Actually, that is not the way. What we need to do is, there's a very nice Zen saying that you leave your front and back door open, allow thoughts to come in and go, don't serve them tea. If I'm sitting, so the idea is, if I'm sitting and I'm just focusing on my breathing, then some thought comes, either you just label it as thinking, Or what you have to do is don't suppress it. It's there, it will maybe distract you and it will go away. But what happens is if you suppress it, then it will persist further. Or if you chase after it, then of course you will be totally distracted. So I'm sitting, there is a thought, maybe you can label it as thinking. Then again, you come back to your breathing. Each time some thought, some distraction comes, just without any judgment, without any irritation, you are just allowing it to be there. If it is distracting you, come back to the breathing, just in, out. Again, it comes and again. This way, when we stop fighting our thoughts, when we stop resisting our thoughts, then you can see that there may be thoughts which are coming and going. And sometimes people have a lot of thoughts, racing thoughts one after the other. But what happens is when we start to resist it or we start to suppress it, there is the problem. But if you allow it, you will see automatically, almost by some kind of magic, they will start decreasing gradually. The main thing is not to resist it, just be present, allow things as they are, and don't suppress it. And and another thing I'd like to add is we have to be a little patient. Immediately after 2 or 3 sessions, people think, oh, there's nothing happening. These shifts, will automatically take place, and you will never know when it is taking place. Maybe sometimes probably your wife or your husband or your children may say, oh, you are a bit changed. There's some change in you. You're not reacting so much as you used to, because that extra space opens up within you, space between your thoughts, space between any response, any stimuli and a response. There's another wonderful saying by Viktor Franklin: between any stimulus and response is a space. In that space is the power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and freedom. So if someone tells something which maybe mostly will make you angry, and then we react. But once we start just sitting, practicing, staying with our feelings and emotions, that extra space opens up. And then when someone says something, you can see that you will respond rather than react. And this will take place on its own. In fact, it is often called as the magic quarter second. It's just a very fraction of a second, that space, but it can help you respond in a wiser manner.
I'm just taking that in. It is such a wonderful thought. We touched upon this briefly, that some of the concepts have been mentioned in a lot of religious texts, and then in modern times we have simplified it and adopted it into our practice. I noticed that somatic practitioners talk about a lot of breathing exercise, and I wanted to understand that what does it actually do to us. I wouldn't know all the details of anatomy, but we have different sections that processes emotions and something that processes logic. So what happens is whenever these sensations come to our brain as a signal, instead of going to the logical brain or to the
Yes.
neocortex, it goes to amygdala, and then it triggers a rapid response, which is why we react. Breathing exercises is slowing down the cycle so that release of hormones dissipates and that emotion is gone and the logical brain takes over. So it is basically
Absolutely.
a fight between logical brain and
Emotional brain. This is very well said, Abra. And there's a term, the amygdala hijack. What happens is when something happens, then immediately the amygdala is activated and it's the fight or flight response, and you react immediately. How dare you say something like this or something? So that is the amygdala hijack, where it is instant reaction. But when, with all these breathing techniques, mindfulness practices, being aware, acknowledging, just allowing, what happens is the neural pathways, they go to the neocortex, where it is more of a response rather than a reaction. So that's very well said. It's the we are by all these processes are training the mind to bypass the amygdala, where rather than you just immediately reacting, you are responding.
Thank you.
The breathing also, it activates our vagus nerve. So we have got the sympathetic and parasympathetic system in our body. So the sympathetic is more fight or flight response, while the parasympathetic, it is like the brakes of the car. It is a kind of those pauses which we take. It's a kind of a slowing down process. So whenever we are our breathing is slowing down, it is activating the parasympathetic response. And the parasympathetic response is a the response which calms the mind and the brain.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I have another question in terms of mindfulness. It's that how do we build self awareness in today's world, because we are often challenged, threatened, sometimes bullied. There are all these flow of negative emotions and things that are flowing in. How do we truly build self awareness through meditation?
That's so important. And right through over the period of years, and especially with the advent of social media, and there is so much of input and information flooding, and all over there seems to be one is the information flooding, whether it is Facebook or Instagram, or whenever you see the news, and there'll be all these negative all these negative news and all these things, disturbing kind of stimulus all over. So we are flooded all over. And here, actually, these practices, they make so much more sense. And it is not just a luxury. It's not something that, okay, I'm just trying to be a little, say, happier, a little more peaceful. No, it is vital for our well being, for our survival, and for our resilience. The most important thing is that we take that first step. I always tell people who approach me and who ask for guidance, they'll say ki, like a lot of and that's why actually I when I gave the TEDx talk, when I wrote the book, and then a lot of some of my friends who are busy doctors, and they don't have time, they said ki, we don't have so much time. Okay, you can take out maybe 1 hour, 1 or 2 hours or whatever, but we don't have. But is there something which we can do even for 5 minutes, 10 minutes? I said, why not? It is important to break the autopilot mode of reacting and working, and to break that mindless cycle. Sometimes even 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day can be very important. So I always say, take that first step. Start where you are, wherever you are. If you are very busy, if today you can only afford 5 minutes, start with that. But do it in a consistent manner. You take out those 5 minutes daily, and you will see, when once you are able to do it for some time, you will see that there is some change or some shift which is happening within you. If you get that taste, then you yourself are going to build that those extra time. And another important thing is that, okay, whatever 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour, whichever time you take out, maybe in the morning or in the evening, so that has to be in one particular part of the day. But other than that, it is the rest of the hours, when we are working, when we are interacting with people, that is the most important practice. And if we become a little more mindful and aware, once we realize how much being aware and mindful can help us, then we can take these small moments. For example, now I'll tell you in the TEDx talk, if you remember, when I was talking about one strategy, the space. So I said, sometimes in my OPD, we have around 40 or 50 patients. Sometimes it can be very busy. So what I do is just in between, I'll just maybe close the door for a minute. And wherever I am, I'm sitting, just again being centered. One breath, just being aware in and out. just acknowledging that itself, it will take hardly 30 seconds. That can bring us back to being more centered, being more present. And we can take these small gaps throughout the day. And there are four T's which has been mentioned, which I'll tell you briefly. One is tea, a tea or coffee break. Anyway, we are throughout the day taking those time out for tea or coffee. We can just we can just be a little more present, drink our tea a little more mindfully. So that probably you're doing it 2 or 3 times a day. Second is toilet. Whenever we use a washroom, just a simple act as washing our hands, the feel of the soap and water in our hands, it can bring you back into a state of presence. The third is telephone, phones. We are always on the mobile. Sometimes during the day, you can, whenever a notification come, you can mentally just say, okay, present again. And the fourth is transition. We are always in transition. Say if I'm doing stopping one activity, like after this interview, I'll be doing something else. You'll be doing something else. So that time again, you can say, okay, now let me be present again. So actually, throughout the day, we have innumerable opportunities to just become more centered, more present, and of course, take out whatever time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever is there in your schedule, take it, and you will notice the difference over a period of weeks.
Yes, you said that very beautifully that we are sometimes too stressed, too busy in our
Yes.
days that even we don't have that 1 second of breathing space. And even that interruption, it can make a big difference.
And sometimes it's so funny and so hilarious that if I tell some of my friends or colleagues, okay, you just take out those few minutes, then they'll say, oh, I'm too busy to even take out 1 minute. So I say, ki, however busy you are, I'm sure you would like to have a little more peace or wellness or being in a better frame of mind. So don't think about it as 2 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And there's one very nice saying, a lot of people may have read The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari by Robin Sharma. I remember various many years ago when I was just starting my practice, I thought I also don't have any time. Then he talked about there is a car speeding in the desert and the gas tank, the petrol tank is almost nearing empty, and he sees a petrol pump filling machine, and he says, oh no, I'm in a hurry, I don't have time to fill petrol. So that how long is the car going to last? Then after a few miles or kilometers it's going to stop anyway. So we need to take out those moments to fill up our tank, because unless our tank is full or nearly full, we cannot give anyone anything. We cannot pour from an empty cup. So it is very important that we need to fill our cup first. Otherwise, that will finally lead to some kind of breakdown, stress, burnout. These, okay, I understand that not everyone has those 1 or 2 hours. Actually, everyone has, but people may think they don't have. That is okay. But you can always take out those 5, 10 minutes just so that you can keep your cup full. And when your cup is full, you can serve others in a much more better and productive way.
Beautiful. I always request my guests that if they're a writer, can they read something from their book?
I'll just read maybe a couple of lines. What I wrote is in the preface, because this is something which came from my experience. The constant search for a future elusive goal or achievement where everything will fall neatly into place never seems to end. My intention through this book is to share a simple yet profound truth, which I realized only through all my experience and challenges. This moment is our true refuge and sanctuary. This moment is enough, and so are we. What I also had experienced before, and this constant refrain from everyone that something is missing, something is lacking, something is not enough. Even if everything is seemingly going on the surface, you're earning, your family is good, everything, but there seems to be that something which is probably not enough. We constantly think, okay, and we feel that maybe when we achieve the next goal, the next dream job, the next car, the next partner, the next relation, then probably it will be complete. But then we go, we achieve that, secure that next whatever thing we wanted. Still, there is something which is not enough. And what I realized, and probably that's why this journey was so meaningful and I wanted to share, is that when we are deeply anchored in the now, when we are deeply in this present, and it's not just the time of presence, but just when we anchored in that which is deeper than our thoughts and emotions, that presence, that state of presence, then we realize that this moment, however, in whatever form it is enough, and so are we. There is what we are actually, and in the book I've explored it in the chapter on who am I, exploring who am I. So those who are more interested, they can read it. So what we are actually, which is deeper than our thoughts and emotions, that we, that I, that is actually enough right now at this moment. It does not even require a few seconds from now, just now. But we need to experience that. And a lot, I'm sure many of the listeners would have read the book by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. That was the first book which really set me thinking about being more present, being aware of a deeper dimension within us. And I read it and it resonated a lot. But it was only this journey, this failure, this whatever happened through this, that what emerged, and I could experience that nowness, that state of presence.
That is wonderful. These are such favorite topics and close to my heart that I can go on and on about this. But in the interest of time, is there anything else you'd like to add to the listeners?
What I'd like to add, and which first, as I said, it attracted me to your podcast about failing with me, is what I would like to share also is that we often have these mental concepts of failure, success, good, bad, all these things. We mentally label it that this should be happening, this should not be happening. But when we are willing to face whatever is happening with the open heart, when we are willing to live wholeheartedly and embrace whatever is taking place without resisting it, it can actually transform everything. Most of the time, we are in a state of resistance. We always feel that this should not be happening and that should take place. But we should realize that in our limited minds, we can only label it as this should not be happening. But when we allow whatever to is happening to, and we have faith that the universe is going to guide us, it can be really life changing. And that I, again, this line I had read it in Eckhart Tolle's book, that the deepest disappointment, the deepest despair, and the most challenging episode in your life, that itself, you can become an alchemist and transmute that base metal of suffering into gold. And this is my invitation to all the viewers, that whatever is happening, maybe the most painful situation is taking place in your life right now. But I can assure you that if you're open to it, when you are totally present with what is happening and you say yes internally, that very situation can be the opening and portal into a very deep awakening. So just allow that to take place.
Wonderful. I'll just conclude with something that this
Yes.
reminded me. I was reading a book which is basically explanation of Buddhist philosophies in modern times, and one of the
Mm,
things it said, and it stayed with me up after months, is that when we see something in our life, instead of judging, if we just take a step back and become like an observer in an experiment, just think this is an experiment and I am observing it. I'm not neither contributing to it nor I am withdrawing from it. I am just a silent observer uh, looking at everything.
looking
Then
at
we
it.
can survive anything that comes
Wonderful.
up.
That's a very beautiful. Thank you for this podcast. It's a wonderful talk I had with you, and I would really love to connect
Yeah.
again. Your podcast is touching so many people, and I'm sure it is going to multiply because this, what you're doing, is sharing something very deep, very personal, very poignant, and very meaningful. And I wish you all the very best for what you're doing.